One letter, one tear. And suddenly, a Hollywood legend was no longer just an actor. He was someone's silent hero. No one expected that an ordinary morning would end with Sylvester Stallone sitting quietly in his home, tears rolling down. His face holding a letter that had traveled thousands of miles from a place called Burkina Faso. It wasn't a movie script. It wasn't a fan request. It was something far deeper, a message that reminded him of the quiet impact this story had made on someone he'd never even met. That morning started like any other. Stallone was in his office, looking through fan mail with his assistant, Michael. Most letters were normal, autograph requests, kind messages, or old photos from his Rocky and Rambo days. But one envelope stood out. It was brown, slightly wrinkled, with no stamp, no logo. Only one sentence written by hand. To Mr. Sylvester Stallone, urgent. Michael almost ignored it. But Stallone stopped him. "Wait," he said. "Let me see that one." He opened it carefully. Inside was one piece of paper. The handwriting was neat and clear. At the bottom, a bold name was signed. Ibrahim Traoré, President of the Transition Burkina Faso. Stallone paused. Burkina Faso? He hadn't thought about that country in years. As he began to read, his eyes slowly filled with emotion. Michael looked at him. "What does it say?" Stallone didn't speak. He held the letter tightly, like it meant more than anything else around him. Then, softly, he began to read aloud. "Dear Sylvester, I'm not writing to you as a president. I'm writing to you as someone who once sat in a hot, broken classroom, watching a black and white TV. That's when I first saw you. You were running, falling, getting back up. I didn't speak English, but I understood your fight. You made me feel like I could fight too, against hunger, fear, and pain. You showed me how to keep going, and today I'm standing tall. Because once, Rocky stood too." Stallone wiped his eyes. The tears had already fallen onto the letter. "I don't even know this man," he whispered. "But somehow, he knows me." Michael picked up his phone. "We should find out if this is real." Stallone stopped him. "Not yet." He looked back at the letter and read the last part. "There are kids here who need real heroes. Not just the ones on screen, the ones who care enough to show up. If you ever feel it in your heart, visit us. Let them see the man I once watched from far away. With deep respect, Ibrahim Traoré." Michael looked up. "Are you going to reply?" Stallone shook his head. "No." Michael was confused. "I'm not going to write back," Stallone said. "I'm going to go." That same night, he called his team and asked for a private flight. "No news, no cameras," he said. "To where?" his assistant asked. Stallone looked at the letter and answered, "Burkina Faso." When the plane landed in Ouagadougou, the capital of Burkina Faso, there were no fans, no lights, just warm air, dusty streets, and children waving through the fences. The man who once played Rocky was now walking into something more real than any movie. A quiet escort met him at the airport. No sirens, just two black SUVs and a small Burkina Faso flag taped to the windshield. A kind man walked up. "The president isn't here yet," he said, "but he asked us to take you somewhere first." "Where?" Stallone asked. The man smiled. "To the place where your story began." They drove through narrow streets, passing markets, old buildings, and playgrounds. Finally, they stopped at a small school made of clay, with cracked windows and fading paint. A simple sign said, "École de l'Espoir," the School of Hope. The guide leaned toward him and said, "This is where the president first saw Rocky." Sometimes the most powerful scenes don't happen on camera. They happen in silence, in places forgotten by the world, but remembered by the heart. Stallone stood still, barely breathing. He hadn't even met Ibrahim Traoré yet. but something inside him already felt broken. The school grounds were quiet, a few teachers cleaning up, some children playing in the far corner. The guide walked beside him, leading him through a narrow hallway. The walls were covered in fading chalk drawings and torn paper posters. They stopped at a small room with no door. The air smelled like dust and memories. "This is where they watched it," the guide whispered. In the center of the room sat an old metal projector, rusted with time. Stallone stepped inside. There was no screen, just a white sheet still hanging on the wall, stained and wrinkled. But in his mind, he could already see it. A young boy named Ibrahim, sitting on a cold floor, eyes wide open, watching Rocky fight for every breath. No popcorn, no cheers, just pure hope. Then, out of nowhere, a small barefoot boy walked in. He looked up at Stallone with big, curious eyes. "Satua." "Rocky," he whispered. Stallone knelt down, placed a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder, and smiled. "No," he said softly, "but I'm here because of you." Sunlight poured through the dusty window, filling the room with golden light. Inside that quiet space, the past and the present finally met. That evening, Stallone sat alone in the small guest house arranged for him. He read the president's letter again and again. Every word felt heavier now. A knock came. A young woman, dressed in beautiful traditional clothes, handed him a small wooden box. She smiled and left without saying a word. Inside the box was a simple hand-carved bracelet and another letter. "Mr. Stallone, you owe us nothing, but your story already gave us everything. Tomorrow, if you feel it in your heart, I'd be honored to meet you. Not as a fan, Ibrahim." Stallone held the bracelet in his hand for a long time. This wasn't about a movie anymore. It was about real people, about gratitude, about how a story can live in someone's soul when they have nothing but dreams to hold on to. He looked up at the ceiling, tears in his eyes. "This is the most important role I've ever played," he whispered. "And there's no script for it." The next morning in Ouagadougou was calm and silent, like the city itself was waiting. There were no cameras at the presidential home, no press, just a simple tree in the garden and two wooden chairs set beneath it. President Ibrahim Traore waited with a calm smile. When Stallone arrived, he didn't walk like a star. He walked with humility. They shook hands gently. "You're not what I expected," Stallone said with a small laugh. "And neither are you," Traore replied. They sat together. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was peaceful. The kind of silence that happens when two souls recognize something in each other. "I watched Rocky when I had nothing," Traore said. Quietly, "It made me believe I could fight for something better." Stallone nodded, his voice low. "I made that film when I had nothing too. Two lives, born in different worlds, but somehow connected by the same fire." Then Traore placed a third chair between them. "For someone else," he said. "For who?" Stallone asked. "For every child who ever felt invisible," Traore answered. Before they parted, the president handed Stallone a sealed envelope. "Read this in private," he said gently. That evening, back in his room, Stallone opened the envelope. Inside were letters, some neat, some scribbled, some with little drawings in the corners. They were written by orphans, street kids, and school children who had once felt forgotten. One said, "Dear Rocky, I run in the mornings before school like you. It makes me feel strong." Another read, "You punch bad guys. I want to punch hunger. Thank you." A third one said, "President Traore calls you his brother. So, that makes you our uncle." The tears came before he even noticed them. These weren't fan letters. They were love letters. From a generation that once found strength in his fight. They were thank you notes from children who had once felt invisible, now lifted by a film, and a leader who refused to forget them. One small paper had just a single line, almost too faint to read. "When I'm scared," I remember Rocky got up. Stallone folded the note, placed it gently in his shirt pocket, and whispered, "I'm not the hero here. These kids are." The next morning, he made a quiet request. "I want to meet them, the kids." President Traore didn't say anything. He just nodded. They drove through the edge of the city, where the roads were rough and the buildings simple. The compound wasn't big, not fancy, but it was full of energy. Barefoot children ran through the dust, laughing, chasing each other, singing. When Stallone stepped out of the car, they didn't rush him with cameras or call out, "Rocky!" They ran to him and hugged him. One little girl came forward. She reached for his hand and placed something small into his palm. A broken toy. "For you," she whispered with a shy smile. Stallone held it like a gift made of gold. Another boy jumped onto his back, giggling with joy. Traore watched from behind, his eyes glowing with pride. "They don't see a movie star," he said softly. "They see someone who never gave up." And in that moment, surrounded by dirt, roads, worn sandals, and pure laughter, Stallone understood. This wasn't about his fame or even his past. It was about children who believed the world could change, even if just a little, because of kindness, courage, and a story that told them they mattered. As he turned to leave, one child tugged on his sleeve. He leaned down, and the boy whispered something into his ear. Stallone closed his eyes. His throat tightened. And again, he cried. But this time, the tears were filled with hope. That night, back at the guest house, he couldn't sleep. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying the day in his mind. Their faces, their voices, their dreams. His phone buzzed beside him. A message from his assistant in LA. "TMZ says you're filming. Press is asking where you are. Want us to correct it?" Stallone didn't reply. Instead, he picked up a notebook and began to write. Not a scene, not a quote, just a letter to himself. He wrote about guilt, about the years spent in comfort, unaware of what true survival looked like. He wrote about Ibrahim Traoré, about his quiet strength, his humility, and how one man with almost nothing was doing more for his people than Hollywood ever had with millions. He wrote, "I came here thinking I was famous, but now I'm finally learning what it means to be human." When he finished, he folded the page and left it beside his bed. Then, without a word, he knelt down and prayed, not for himself, not for success, but for those children, still running barefoot, still full of light, still dreaming with nothing but dust under their feet. The next morning, President Traoré invited him to a small gathering under the wide shade of a baobab tree. Only a few people were there, a teacher, a nurse, and 4 children who had just entered a new care program. No reporters, no headlines, just people. Traoré stood holding a wooden box in his hands. He looked at Stallone, then at the children. "This man gave me courage when I was just a boy," he said. "Today, I want to give something back. Not only to him, but to every child in Burkina Faso." He opened the box. Inside were drawings, sketches, and building plans, blueprints for a film and storytelling academy. It would be built near the same school where a dusty projector once showed Rocky. Stallone's mouth opened in disbelief. "It won't be big," Traoré said, smiling, "but it will be ours. A place where our children can tell their stories, where they can believe they matter." One of the young girls clapped in excitement. Stallone stood up, emotional and moved. I don't know what to say." Traoré stepped forward. "Say nothing," he replied. "But promise me, you'll help us build it." Stallone placed a hand over his heart. "With everything I've got." And just like that, a new chapter quietly began. Later that day, Traoré surprised Stallone with one final visit. They drove down a quiet road, stopping outside a freshly painted building that Stallone hadn't seen before. A simple sign hung on the wall: Maison de Resilience, House of Resilience. It was a trauma center. Some places don't need lights or stages to feel powerful. Sometimes all it takes is a quiet room, a soft voice, and a story that still hurts. Inside, gentle music played in the background. The walls were covered in colorful paintings: animals, warriors, smiling children with bright eyes. This is where we care for children who've lost everything, to war, to sickness, or to life being unfair, Traore said quietly. Nurse guided them into a warm room. 10 children were sitting in a circle, sharing stories. No cameras, no pressure, just truth. One little boy, maybe 7 years old, spoke in a low voice. When my village was attacked, I ran. I hid alone for 2 days. I thought I would die. Another child beside him held his hand and whispered, "But you didn't. You're a fighter." Like Rocky, Stallone swallowed hard. His throat tightened. He looked at the nurse. She nodded softly. "They know who you are." Traore gave a proud smile. "Your story reached farther than you ever thought it could." Just then, a small girl ran up. In her hands was a crayon drawing. Stallone with boxing gloves and wings. "I drew you as a protector," she said sweetly. Stallone dropped to one knee, his eyes glassy. He hugged her tightly. "I think you're the real protector," he whispered back. Later that day, back in the capital, Stallone and Traore appeared together on national television. No bright lights, just 2 chairs, a host, and a quiet, honest moment. This wasn't about drama, the host said. It was a message, a feeling, a reason. She turned to Stallone. "What brought you here, Mr. Stallone?" He paused, took a slow breath. "A letter," he said. "And something bigger than fame." Then, live on camera, he reached into his coat and pulled out the drawing, the one with gloves and angel wings. "I came to meet a president," he said, holding the paper up. "But I found something more. I found a family." His lips trembled. "I've acted for over 40 years. I've won awards. I've heard crowds scream my name. But I've never ever felt love like this." His voice cracked. He couldn't say more. He wiped his eyes, breath shaking. President Traore leaned over and placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "It's because here," he said, "we don't love people for being stars. We love them for their hearts." And across Burkina Faso, and soon around the world, millions watched a man who once played a hero now cry like one. Not from pain, but from something deeper, connection. That night, Traore made a quiet offer. No cameras, no politics. He invited Stallone to his childhood home, not the palace. A small house in the dusty back streets of Ouagadougou. No guards, no press. Just 2 men sitting on wooden stools under the stars. "My mother used to sit here," Traore said softly, "and pray for rain." Stallone looked around. "You grew up here?" Traore nodded. "We didn't have much, but we had courage. That was enough." They shared a simple meal. Rice, grilled chicken, quiet laughter between bites. Then Traore looked up. "People think presidents and actors live different lives," he said. "But really, we're just boys, trying to protect what we love." Stallone looked at the night sky. "You know what this feels like?" "What?" "A scene from a movie I never got to make." Traore smiled. "Maybe now. You will." In that quiet moment, no red carpet, no golden trophies, just 2 souls talking about pain, about hope, and about the little things that make life worth it. The world somehow felt smaller, and maybe even stronger. On Stallone's last morning in Burkina Faso, just before his flight, President Traore handed him a box. "Open it when you get back home," he said. Hours later, Back in Los Angeles, Stallone sat on his couch and gently opened the box. Inside was a folded Burkina Faso flag, stitched with tiny signatures, the children's names. There was a note, handwritten and full of heart. You came as a stranger. You left as family. You will always have a home here. Beneath it was a golden pin, carved with the image of a lion and a rising sun. Stallone recognized it immediately. It was a national honor, given only to heroes. His hands shook. He wasn't expecting this. Not from a leader. Not from a country he barely knew. He stepped outside under the California sky. The stars were different from the ones in Ouagadougou, but for some reason, they now felt the same. Tears rolled down his face, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't wipe them away. In a world chasing trophies and applause, Stallone had finally discovered the one role that truly mattered, the role of being human. He didn't need lights. He didn't need crowds. He just whispered to himself, "This is the most important role I've ever played, being human." There was no script, just belonging. 2 hours into his flight back to the US, Stallone sat quietly by the window. In his hand was the note from the gift box, folded, worn. But something inside him felt unfinished. Not guilt, but purpose still left on the ground. He pressed the call button. The flight attendant leaned in. "Can this plane return to Burkina Faso?" he asked gently. The captain was stunned, but Stallone insisted. "I left too soon. I need one more day. Just one." After a short back and forth with authorities, the jet turned. Back in Burkina Faso, President Traoré was outside, speaking with local farmers about a water pipeline. His phone rang. He smiled. I knew he'd come back. When Stallone stepped off the plane, he wore no fresh clothes. No plan, just heart. "I want to help build that storytelling academy. Not just in name," he said. "I'll bring in filmmakers, teachers, cameras, real investment." Traoré placed a hand on his shoulder and whispered, "You didn't just return to Burkina Faso. You returned to yourself." And for the first time in years, Stallone felt fully alive. The next day, a small ceremony was held, not for headlines, but for children. But the world had already heard. People live-streamed from rooftops. Journalists stood at a distance. Social media trembled with emotion. On a simple wooden stage, surrounded by laughing barefoot children, President Traoré introduced him. He once taught us to fight from a screen. Today, he teaches us to believe in person. Then Stallone stepped forward. His voice was steady. "I've played heroes. I've bled on film sets. But I've never felt the weight of real purpose until now." He held up a child's drawing, boxing gloves, and wings. "I came here because of a letter. One letter. In it, the president wrote a line I will never forget. Mr. Stallone, we don't need your fame. We need your faith." He looked at the crowd, at the kids, and now I give it to you, all of it. Some children wept. Mothers clapped. Even the soldiers standing guard wiped their eyes. And the whole world watched a man surrender his pride for humanity. Back in Los Angeles, weeks later, Stallone made a quiet decision that would surprise even his closest fans. He published the full letter from President Traoré online. It read, "Dear Sylvester, I was once a child in a war-torn village, scared, hungry, forgotten. One day, I saw a dusty copy of Rocky. You were bruised, bloody, but you stood up. You taught me to fight. That fight became a fire. I became a soldier, then a leader. Not because I was brave, but because I had hope. That hope came from you. Today, I don't ask for charity. I ask for solidarity. Come meet the children who still carry that fire. Come see that your story is still unfolding." The post went viral. Over 300 million views in just 2 days. World leaders responded. UNICEF pledged support. African filmmakers wrote open letters of gratitude. And people, ordinary people, just cried. For once, the internet wasn't angry. It wasn't divided. It was united by compassion. And now, dear viewer, if you're still here, if this story touched you, I want to ask something simple. Did this move your heart? Did it remind you that fame means nothing without kindness? If it did, please like this video, subscribe to this channel, and most of all, tell us in the comments, what would you do if you got a letter like that? Let's start a chain of empathy, because somewhere out there, someone is still waiting for a sign that they matter. So maybe your words will reach someone who needs them. Maybe your comment won't just be a reply. It'll be a reason. Thanks for staying. Thanks for feeling something real. Because this isn't the end of the story. It's the start of something bigger. Sometimes one day is all it takes to find your real purpose. And when you do, the world changes too.